So then what this means is that actually our brain makes us we still have to. And so our brain actually makes us unmotivated, and that this is not broken. I want you guys to really understand this. That your lack of motivation is not a problem, it's actually how your brain is wired. And so the first thing that this kind of clues us into is if everyone's doing it, and it seems to be like really, really common, then like that's what our brain is designed to do. It's how our brain is supposed to be. And so like this I think is really important, because the basic reason that I think so many people struggle to fix their motivation is that they're defining the problem incorrectly. We're trying to fix something that fundamentally is not broken. Our brain is designed a particular way. And so you're trying to redesign the function of your brain, which is like not possible. So instead, what you should do is like understand how your brain works and then create a life that sort of uses your brain for you instead of trying to reprogram your brain, okay? So what do we kind of do with this, okay? The second thing. Okay, there we go. So the second thing is, do you really lack motivation? So let's just think about this for a second. Are you motivated? So what people usually say is that like, no, I'm not motivated. And let's think about this for a second. So when you wake up every day and you kind of feel bad about yourself, and let's say, I'm just assuming for a moment that you spend your whole day kind of on social media, Reddit, Instagram, YouTube, gaming, etc. Like you wake up every day and you feel terrible about yourself. So you have all of this like shame and like all these like, negative feelings, which we hate having. And despite having all those negative feelings and suffering, we continue to do the same thing. So I want you guys to think a little bit about suffering and how suffering motivates us, right? And if we think about it, usually like we try very hard to avoid suffering. Like if I go to school and I get bullied and people beat me up every day, like it's really hard for me to go to school. And so even if we think about it, despite daily suffering, we continue in our patterns. In how it happens. So what that means, so usually suffering causes us to change our behavior, but what this means is our suffering is actually less than our motivation. Just think about that for a second, right? In order for you to continue doing something that causes you so much pain and suffering, you actually have to be highly, highly motivated to do it. So when people tell me, oh, I have no motivation in life, all I want to do is play video games, what I really interpret is I have a high amount of motivation to play video games all the time. It's not that you lack motivation, it's that your motivation is pointed in the wrong direction. So just think about this for a second. How hard is it for you to stop playing video games? It can be really, really hard. And if it's really, really hard, that means you're like highly, highly motivated to play video games. So let's first understand that the problem isn't that we lack motivation. The problem is that our motivation is pointed in the wrong direction. And furthermore, we don't really think about how complicated tasks are, and we actually have a lot of different kinds of motivation, but this is the main thing to understand. So now if we kind of accept this premise, and if you guys, I encourage you to observe yourself and ask yourself, do you continue doing a behavior despite it causing you suffering? And if the answer is yes, that means your motivation circuitry is actually really hardcore geared towards that behavior. And so then the question becomes like, okay, so then why do people struggle to fix it? And I think the reason people struggle to fix it is because they conceive of it as a lack of something. Whereas like, it's not that it's a lack of something, it's just that thing is there and it's pointed in the wrong direction. So what people try to do is create motivation instead of shifting motivation. And I don't know if you guys realize this, but like creating something that already exists is like really, really hard. But if the problem is not that you lack it, the problem is that like it's an issue of direction, not an issue of like absence or presence. And this is the first fundamental mistake that people make, right? Is they try to fix something that isn't broken, right? Your effort is completely wasted because actually your motivation circuitry is intact and you're highly, highly motivated. You're just motivated towards the wrong thing. So instead of making motivation, what you really need to do is like learn how to turn the steering wheel, and then you're going to be in a far better place. So my answer to this question is, do you lack motivation? My answer is no. I actually think that most people in our generation are highly, highly motivated. addicted. They're just highly motivated in a direction they don't want to be. If you think about people who like play tons of video games and like grind stuff, right? Like they're dedicated to playing 10 hours, 12 hours, 18 hours a day, day after day after day, week after week after week. You have people who are sort of addicted to social media and are dedicated to making posts and crafting their posts and getting likes and getting follows. They're like so dedicated to it. They're highly, highly motivated. And so, the answer is, do we lack motivation? No. Let's start there. So on to number 2. Okay. How does motivation work? Okay. So the first thing is that motivation isn't binary. And what I mean by that is, if you think about motivation, we talk about motivation in a way that is like, I lack motivation or I have motivation, but that's not actually how motivation works. It's not binary, right? If you think about your day, like, let's say, so I have a glass of water, right? So I have a glass of water here. And if I have a glass of water, then, my motivation to drink it is like one type of motivation. My motivation to make money is separate. My motivation to work out is separate. My motivation to play video games is separate. Motivation is not one thing. There are 1,000 different things, calculations that our brain is performing all the time. And depending on those calculations, we actually engage in the action or we don't engage in the action. So that means that we have thousands of motivation calculations. And why is this an important point? So I believe that in order to move forward in life, you need to understand and define your problem. And this is also something that comes from medicine, which is that if you want to appropriately treat a disease, you have to appropriately diagnose a disease. So I think a big problem that people face is of inappropriate diagnosis. So they say, I lack motivation, but that's not really actionable. Like, you can't flip a switch in your brain to create more motivation. And that's why they fundamentally fail, because they're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. So of course that's going to lead them to failure. They're developing treatments with an improper diagnosis. So what we have to understand is that motivation is actually 1,000 different calculations kind of constantly going on. And so let me just kind of put that down. So motivation really is an ongoing calculation about likelihood of success. This is what motivation is. And now we're going to switch gears for a second, okay? So now we're going to take a look at neuroscience, okay? All right. Great. Okay, so we're going to see a little bit about what this means for us, and we're going to look a little bit at science. So this is a paper by actually a good friend of mine, Dr. Dowd, who we trained together. And so this is a paper about schizophrenia. And I think it's bizarre, but one of the best ways to learn about motivation is through studying schizophrenia. And why is that? So if we want to understand how something works, one of the best ways to understand the function of something is to look at cases where it's broken, right? So if we want to understand, okay, how does an engine work? If we remove one piece of the engine and the engine no longer turns on, we can study the engine and sort of figure out, okay, what is the role of that one piece? Does that make sense? So if we want to understand something, looking at a broken version can actually give us a lot of insight into what is broken and what influence that part has. And so why do we look at schizophrenia? Because in schizophrenia, people have two major things going on. One is something that we call positive symptoms, and this is usually what the media portrays, which is that people will sometimes become paranoid or hallucinate or have delusions. And we actually have decent medications for that. The real problem in schizophrenia is actually something that are called negative symptoms, which are, over time, people with schizophrenia start to become really, really amotivated. So when you kind of think about the quintessential crazy homeless person, I'm not trying to be judgmental or anything, but a lot of times people with schizophrenia end up in bad social situations because their motivational drives aren't functioning properly. And so what we know from schizophrenia is that that basically some of their motivational circuitry doesn't work properly. So let's just define, as we look at the paper, so what we see from negative symptoms is aspects of schizophrenia include constructs such as asociality, what that means is people are not social, avolition, a reduction in the motivation to initiate or persist in goal-directed behavior. This is exactly what we're talking about. And anhedonia, a reduction in the ability to experience pleasure. So avolition is something that we see a lot in schizophrenia, and I think is a lot, we also see it in our generation. So let's try to understand how avolition works. And so what we're going to do in this paper is we're really going to look at this figure, okay? And the first thing that I want you guys to notice is that the behavioral response is over here. And, you know, when we think about motivation, we think about, okay, no motivation means kind of... So the first thing is that no one really appreciates that there's a lot of complicated stuff that goes into a behavioral response. That's the first issue, right? So you guys say, oh, I'm not motivated, I need motivation. It's not like A leads to B. There's actually a lot of different things that happen in the brain that lead to a behavioral response and create motivation. So what we're going to focus on today, so I can run through these. So the first thing is hedonics. So what that means is how likable the behavior is. So how pleasurable the behavior is. The second thing that kind of goes into this input is how much you want it. So I want you guys to understand this for a second. Wanting and liking are two different things. Okay? We oftentimes conflate the two, but there's actually completely different circuits in the brain. Your desires and pleasure are actually different things. Even though they're tightly related, reinforcement learning through reward is dopaminergic, and this is wanting. And actually enjoying something is different. Anyway, we're not going to go too much into that. What I really want to focus on is this stuff. So the first thing is that our brain is constantly performing a cost-benefit analysis. And what that means is that we're taking in new information, we're computing some kind of we're performing a computation, and then based on new information and a computation that we're doing, we construct a plan, and then it leads to a behavioral response. Okay, so what does that mean? So we're going to kind of go back to... All right, so my point in kind of diving into that neuroscience for a second is simply that So what does this mean for us? So the main thing to understand is that motivation is not binary, and that actually there's a constant calculation that's going on in our brain about what we should do and what we should not do. So if I think about drinking a glass of water, you know, right now I don't feel like drinking a glass of water. And my brain is performing a calculation. As my sodium level rises in my bloodstream, it sends signals to my brain that make me crave water and get thirsty. And whether I respond to those signals or not depends on all kinds of things like the availability of water. So if water is close by and I'm not very thirsty, I'm likely to drink it. But if water is not close by, then the thirst actually has to increase to change my behavior to get me to go drink water. You guys get that? So there are all kinds of processes that are going on about availability of water. What's my thirst level? What am I doing right now? Am I going to be able to drink water later? Should I drink water now? There are all kinds of things that kind of even go into something as simple as drinking water. And so what does that mean for us? Why do we care about understanding motivation that way? And so I'll kind of give you guys an example. So I think understanding the complexity of motivation helps us understand the different components we can act on to increase motivation. If we think about it as 100% or 0%, then it's hard to act, right? But if we think about motivation as 90%, and there's kind of a 60%, 30%, then how do we navigate between these? How does our brain sort of decide, how do we move from 30 to 60 to 90? And as we understand more variables, we can actually start to make changes in our life to move in this direction. So let me give you guys kind of an example of this process and how understanding complexity of something helps us do a better job. So sometimes people come to me and they say, I want to be healthy. And then what's my answer to that? Do I say, okay, here's how you be healthy? Like, okay, let me just give you health. And people walk around and they say, oh, I want to be healthy. 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 I'm not healthy. I'm not healthy. I'm not healthy. I'm not healthy. And so how do you become healthy? Is healthy something you can become? Like you just become healthy? No. But that's the way that we talk about motivation. We say, oh, I want to be motivated. I lack motivation. I don't have motivation. Other people have motivation. I don't have motivation. I need motivation. I need motivation. And people can walk around and they say, oh, I want to be healthy. I'm not healthy. Other people are healthy. I wish I was like them. If I was luckier in life, I would have been born healthy, just like they're born healthy. But instead, I'm lazy. And they got dealt a good hand in life where their laziness level is low and my laziness level is high. And so I don't have motivation. I wish I could be motivated. Right? So this is where I think, like, if we think about this, like, it's absurd. Like, you don't become healthy. You don't really become healthy. What you do is you understand that health, so health is an emergent property based on multiple variables. And now what I want you guys to just think about that. Like, that makes sense, right? Health is a function of whether you exercise, what you eat, whether you see a therapist, whether you meditate, whether you spend time outdoors, whether you socialize. Health is a really, really complicated process. And if someone comes to me and says, I want to be healthy, can you give me a pill to make me healthy? Or what is the strategy to uncover health? My answer is there isn't one. There are actually a dozen strategies. And the more you understand the components of health, the easier it is to be healthy. So what we're going to do is replace this word with motivation. Right? Is an emergent property that's based on multiple variables, is an ongoing calculation about the likelihood of success. And this calculation has many variables. Okay, so then the question becomes, part 3. What does this mean for us? Okay. So, what we do is we do a likelihood of success calculation. Okay? So I want you guys to think about this. Our brains evolved not in our current society, but in a society where we were like hunter-gatherers, cavemen, whatever. So I want you to imagine that there's a caveman with a spear, right? And the caveman wants to go hunting, and he wants to go look for food. So he like leaves his hut in the morning, and then he looks at different trails. Lots of different trails, right? How does he determine which trail to go down? So he looks at 5 trails, and he's like, oh, I don't really know like what to do. But then he sees, let's say that he sees tracks over here. So as he sees tracks over here, what does that do to his likelihood of success calculation that he's going to find food in this direction? Is the likelihood of success calculation increases the probability. It motivates him to move in this direction. You guys see that? Like suddenly, this bit of data actually changes his motivation very quickly. It's kind of simple, right? And then let's say like, so this is where motivation comes from. So we do a likelihood of success calculation. And then let's say that like over here, he sees actually like, you know, a deer. Okay, so if he sees a deer over here, then what does that do to his success calculation? It increases his success calculation a lot. He's like, oh, there's actually food there. So suddenly his motivation is going in this direction. Now he's going there even more than over here. So if we think about this, his internal motivation is actually influenced very clearly by his probability of success calculation. So let's think a little bit about that. What has to do, so what goes into our probability of success calculation? So I have probability. Okay. And I lack motivation. So let's say that I don't have a job. So what do we think about our probability of success? So like find a job. What's the probability of success for finding a job? Who the F knows? You can't assign a number to that. And if you can't assign a number to that, you're gonna stay in the middle. Just think about this for a second. If our brain has no idea how to assign a likelihood of success, it's not gonna act, right? So let's say, okay, versus play a game, which makes us feel better. What's the likelihood of success here? 100%. So think about this. Look at it, right? How do you find a job? Like, I don't even know. What does that even mean? So in our brain, when you wake up in the morning and you think about, okay, I need to find a job, and then your brain is like, I don't know how to gauge whether that's gonna work or not, right? It's kind of like waking up in the morning and saying, I wanna find a pound of gold. And your brain is gonna be like, I don't know how to do that. Like, what's the likelihood of success of finding a pound of gold? And then your brain is also like, okay, well, we're feeling bad, so that's almost like a need that it wants to fix, like hunger or thirst. So as negative emotions arise within you, your brain is like, what can we do about these negative emotions? Because I'm trying to protect you, buddy, and I know that you're suffering right now. Why don't we just go play a game? And so the problem is that your brain is actually working perfectly fine. It's doing a good job at what it knows how to do. And as long as you view your problems as something, or your goals as something that like don't have clear likelihoods of success, then you're not gonna do them. And so let's think about this for a second, right? So a lot of people nowadays would rather play games with a 0% chance of finding a job rather than apply for a job with a 10% chance of success. Just think about that for a second. You guys would rather do something that definitely does not help you move forward in life versus something that may not help you move forward. And how on earth does this work? Right? Why on earth would your brain pick a 0% chance over a 10% chance? And the reason is because this is actually not a 0% chance. This is a 100% chance of feeling better. So it's not that you lack motivation. It's simply that, you know, your brain is doing like a different kind of calculation, and like this is why, this is why you guys do this, right? So if you think about this, you know, this is an observation. This is what I was saying about observation. So if we actually look at ourselves, we find this to be true. And if this is true, rather than assuming that we're broken, what we should do is take that observation and try to use it as like scientific data, and then develop an explanatory hypothesis that accounts for this observation. The observations that you make about yourself are not signs that you're broken. They're clues as to how you work. And that's a really, really important principle that I believe 100% in. So don't assume yourself to be broken. Assume that everything about you is data about how you work, and then start to construct a strategy about how to deal with those truths, okay? So the second thing is that, so if we think about likelihood of success, what else kind of goes into this? So the next big thing that goes into it is confidence, right? So like, if we think about, our hunter again, and let's say that there's a deer over here, and then there's a yak over here. Okay. So whether he goes for the deer or he goes for the yak depends on his confidence in being able to catch either one, right? And be able to hunt it down. So if we think about a likelihood of success calculation, your fundamental confidence for success leads to the likelihood of success. So what that means is that if your confidence is low, that leads to a low likelihood of success. And that's like mathematics. And if we have a low likelihood of success, that in turn leads to low motivation or lack of behavior. Right? And I don't know how else to put this, but why don't you guys wake up every day and jump up into the air and try to fly? Because wouldn't it be awesome to be able to fly? Like, it would be cool if you could fly. Like, imagine like how fun that would be. But why don't you wake up every day and jump up and try to fly? Like, why don't you guys do that? Because the likelihood of success is close to zero. So even though you want to be able to fly, you're not going to spend time trying to fly if the likelihood of success is zero. So likelihood of success leads to motivation or lack of or behavior. And if we think about what leads to likelihood of success, it's confidence in your ability. Okay? So what is this? So what should you do? All this stuff is fine. What? Right? What should you do? So the first thing to understand, well, so let's look at our equation. So confidence leads to likelihood of success, which in turn leads to motivation. So now the question is, if we want to increase this quantity, how can we act on these two quantities? So the first is that we can change our task from find a job, likelihood of success 0%. So actually, let's say 0. Let's do it a little bit. Okay. Let's say 1%. To apply. Now what happens? So if we set our target as applying for our job, our brain's like, oh, like applying for a job, I can do that. Let's say 30%. Let's remember we're us, right? So even though it's perfectly in our control, our brain is like, oh, like applying for a job, like I understand what that means. Okay? Let's even change it a little bit further. Fill out a job application. It's like 50%. And then download a job. That's pretty easy. Downloading a job application. Easy. You guys see this? This is the trend. So you have to program your task so that your brain is like, oh, actually, I can do that. So if we go back to our hunter, if we tell our hunter, go find food in the mount, like in a 10-mile radius, the hunter doesn't know where to start. You guys get that? The more roads they have, the bigger the task is, the more paralyzed the hunter is. So if the hunter gets some kind of data that focuses his attention, his ability to act actually increases. So we need to do the same thing over here. We need to change our task to increase the likelihood of success. And as you increase the likelihood of success, you're more able to act. So next question is, what about confidence? So we're gonna do an entire video on confidence, but let's just think a little bit about this. So what leads to confidence? So the first thing, how do you get confidence? So the first thing is that I'm gonna kind of just toss out a couple of things. The first thing is that dealing with negative emotion. So one of the things that keeps us from being confident is that we're sitting on these piles, generally speaking, of like negative emotion. And if you feel bad about yourself, like if you have shame, if you have fear, if you have low self-worth, then it's hard to be confident. And confidence is gonna affect all of these numbers, right? So the first thing, and this is kind of weird because everyone kind of thinks about, oh, how do I solve motivation? How do I apply for a job? You know, they're looking sort of externally, or even they'll talk about habit or brain hacks, or they'll develop all kinds of external strategies. Whereas my overwhelming experience is that if you actually deal with your negative emotions, your confidence increases and the motivation naturally goes up. Motivation just goes up on its own. It's just like it happens magically. Like as I do therapy with people and I help people process their negative emotions, they just start being more active in life. So one solution to motivation is just by directly dealing with your confidence and addressing your confidence. The next thing that you can do is understand where confidence comes from. So confidence, a lot of people think that confidence comes from success, but actually that's not true. So if you guys watch some of our videos, you'll realize that success after success after success actually leads to things like imposter syndrome. So confidence comes from surviving failure. Okay? And so what that means is that when most people are thinking about motivation, they think that if they get like something good going on for them, they'll be motivated, and that kind of leads to like positivity. So what I want you guys to understand is that, you know, likelihood of success comes from confidence, right? So we kind of have this relationship here. And confidence comes from surviving failure. And so the real key to building confidence is actually failing. And what that means is that failure leads to confidence. And confidence leads to success. So what that means is that failure really leads to success. And let's just think about this for a second. Like if you think about a kid, right? How does a kid get confident in walking? If you've ever watched a kid learn how to walk, at first they're hesitant to walk because they're afraid of falling. So they hold on to things and you try to get them to take like 1 or 2 steps. And you really have to encourage a kid to learn how to walk. And so the tricky thing here is like, how does a kid learn how to walk? And what happens is they fall and then they get back up again and they're like, oh, actually falling's not that big of a deal. And the more they fall, the easier it becomes to try. So failure makes trying